Now, this was Eli Lilly's controversial drug that was withdrawn from the U.S. market in 1982, only 12 weeks after it was introduced in the United States.
Right.
And it had been in the British area. Had been sold there for a year.
Well, we just started selling it there a little bit before,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Now, Eli Lilly received a lot of negative press because of the recall of Oriflex. And it really suffered some reputational problems due to the reports of deaths of the British citizens that was then followed by deaths of 11 citizens of the United States. So you had a PR nightmare,
Right.
crisis, and you implemented a crisis communication system, which I believe you had designed prior to this.
Correct.
It was a complicated sequence of events, and can you just tell us about the challenges that you faced and ethical decisions that you had to make at this time?
Sure. What actually Oriflex was, and the generic name was Binoxaprofen, and this was the very first pharmaceutical product that any drug company had ever decided to launch through a public relations campaign.
Okay.
So that's a first itself as well. And so what had actually occurred, the drug hadn't, it was ready to be sold in the United Kingdom, but what happened is one of the medical doctors who was testing the drug wrote a report in the British Medical Journal, Lancet, that said, oh, by the way, I had a number of patients on this drug, elderly patients, and all of them had initial relief from arthritis, but they all died. And so this report was published just days before we were supposed to be going to the Waldorf Astoria in New York for a major news conference that we already had everything set in gear. So the day before, I'll never forget, the day before the news event, we met in Chicago, and senior management, concerned about the fact that this had taken place, this report was out there, but hearing, from the medical doctors on our team that, this was a fluke, we called this meeting together. The chairman of the company, Richard Wood, Gene Stepp, who's the head of pharmaceutical, Ian Shedden, the head of who's the medical director of Lilly, and a bunch of other executives. And I will never forget, Gene Stepp turned to Ian Shedden, Dr. Shedden, and said, we're about to send Ron and his team to New York to launch this product. Is there any reason that you know of that we should not proceed? And he said, Dr. Shedden said, absolutely none whatsoever. And he used the medical terms for the fact that this wasn't a scientific study that was done, blah, 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 and it contrasted with the work and the investigations that we were doing with the new drug application in the United States, so we proceeded. We showed up at the news event at the Waldorf, and it was a room full of people, cameras from all around the world. All the major media was there, and we had patients who had been on the drug and people who could not get out of bed 6 months ago who are walking. The photographer for our event used to have to crawl to the bathroom in the morning in pain, and he's down on his knees and hopping around, taking pictures at the event. I mean, it was a phenomenal product, I think. But what happened is we launched the drug, phenomenal news stories. Unfortunately, it sometimes occurs, the media will get out a little ahead of where we really intended for them to go, and they were declaring it a wonder drug, and anyone who had arthritis anywhere in the United States was clamoring to get this drug. Sales totally took off, and people and doctors were not reading the package literature that clearly said that if you have impaired renal function, if your kidneys aren't working, or if you have sensitivity to the sun, that you should stay out of the sun if you take it. All these other factors were not taking it. So what happened is the side effect profile just escalated, and it seemed it seemed like it was on the market longer than 12 weeks, but it was a fast 12 weeks. We had congressional hearings, we had FDA hearings, and it was literally 24/7 media calls. And I forgot a very important part of that. My wife was pregnant and expected to deliver our first son at that time, and we were in the delivery room, the labor room. I never forget. And my boss called and said a newspaper in Greece was calling from Athens with they were on deadline. And media worked a little different back then. I mean, they were on deadlines and things and so I said, I have something to attend to now. I'll call, in an hour or so. It was a crazy time. So it was a perfect storm. I think that having the communications program, the crisis plan in place, initially, everything just kind of falls apart, but then you kind of keep reminding people that, okay, let's go back to the book. We're not looking through the book, but we're already trained people as to how you're supposed to go through the crisis, who's going to be handling this aspect, who's talking to employees, who's talking to Wall Street, the message points, how they're constructed, et cetera. So, the action plan after we decided to withdraw the drug, and that happened, by the way, we're flying back from a congressional hearing in Washington, the phone and then you didn't have airphones. And so we got into the hangar, the Lilly hangar, and my boss had a call waiting for him, call immediately the CEO, who said he just heard from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Joseph Califano, that you have until 5 o'clock today to voluntarily withdraw the drug, or we're going to ban it. And obviously there are all kinds of legal issues involved with banning it, so literally sitting around the terminal, we decided that we were going to pull the drug, and that evening we had about 600 media calls that we fielded between then and the following morning. So it was an amazing time. I look back on it, and it was a defining moment in my career, in the fact that you were tested on so many levels. And that's where one of the Page principles about remaining calm was important, because people kept wondering why I hadn't fallen apart or killed somebody myself. It was a very stressful time, but the team just responded beautifully.
Is there anything you can share about? Okay, so you withdrew the drug. How did you recover from all of that? Were there any particular things that you did?
Yeah.
So that, obviously Lilly has maintained a reputation.
Correct. Yeah, the key, I think, in this case was responding quickly. We did have a lot of litigation afterwards, and we felt very strongly, and I still do, that it was a great drug. And I think, a lot of people who have arthritis today are being denied a product that if properly presented in the right setting with their doctor, they stay out of the sun, and they make sure that they drink lots of water, and that they're not over 80 years old, and all the other factors, that the drug could have really brought a lot of help to people. And there was a lot of that sentiment that was building. People after it was pulled were livid, people who were affected. So there was always a sense that maybe it was a good drug, that that maybe was just introduced a little too soon. And so we decided to put a stake in the ground and indicate that that's the last time we're going to introduce a drug through PR. And now that's changed. Now PR is the first place they go, and advertising, it's a totally different world than it was back then. But so the company decided, well, let's just pull back for a while, settle the litigation that's out there, and be good citizens about it, and make sure that through our philanthropy and everything else we do, that we restore our reputation primarily with the doctors. A lot of doctors were upset with us because of how we introduced this product, because it puts them in a situation where their patient will come in and demand it. And they may not know anything about the drug, and what do some doctors do? They go ahead and write the prescription, and then their patient either got sick, or there are other issues that arose. So we really had to go back in and focus on who our true customers were and the fact that the people, the pharmacists and the doctors who were prescribing it. So just, and not going out too far on any of the new products that we launched. We were always very careful in how we trim back. And then we also decided to spend a lot more time on internal communications because this was a devastating moment inside the company. Morale was just absolutely down, and we had to find ways of getting people, especially in the scientific area, that were coming up with new discoveries, that they didn't want this to happen to what they were working on. So there was a lot of that mending that had to occur.
An exciting time.
It was. At the time, you know, you thought that you were going to lose your mind because of all of the demands, and you were working constantly, and you had people coming from you on all sides. But I'll never forget, you know, Bettina Gregory from ABC News at the time was really following the story, and it was on. She was following it very closely. And, you know, the media would always say, what's good about, you know, the people at Lilly is you're in the middle of this problem, you're always calling us back. If you don't have an immediate answer, you get one as fast as you can, and you never leave us hanging. And so we tried to state some of those principles that you know, we're going to need friends there. And I think as a result, we got the benefit of the doubt, even though it was a bad situation.
Let's jump to 1993 and just talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
You became Divisional Vice President of Public Affairs with Sears, Roebuck and Company in 93.
Mm-hmm.
And then several years later, actually in 2002, Sears merged with Lands' End. Now during that time, you placed a lot of importance on the internal stakeholders and communicating with the employees
Right.
Of both organizations. Now, it took a lot of coordination and perfect timing. And were you working directly at that time with the CEOs? And talk a little bit about that,
Okay.
and share your recommendations about what are the PR issues during mergers and acquisitions.
Okay. The Lands' End acquisition, actually, the CEO, Alan Lacey, at the time, I worked pretty regularly with him, and Alan bounced this idea of we need to jumpstart our apparel offering at Sears, and this seemed to be a logical opportunity. And we'd looked at Lands' End and Eddie Bauer and a bunch of other opportunities that were there in the past, but the stars were lining up, and we seemed to detect some interest from the Comer family, who was the primary shareholder in Lands' End. So the negotiations started. I went to most of those sessions, and the exciting part from the PR person's perspective is that you were the only communicator in the room, professional communicator, because you're there with investment bankers and more attorneys, Wall Street attorneys than you could imagine, and sometimes the CEOs, but generally it was all of the negotiation, the backroom work was done, and they'd recess for a while, go talk to the CEOs and come back, and the sessions were just going on endlessly. So the good thing about being in the middle of that is you picked up the nuances that you're going to find very helpful later in how you communicated internally to both audiences. You found out what they were saying about how Dodgeville, Wisconsin, which is where Lands' End is based, they view things differently than perhaps somebody in Chicago, where Sears is headquartered. So they're totally different messages. At Dodgeville, a large number of the employees also have full-time farming jobs, and they're working here either part-time or in the mornings, and then they're working on the farm that evening. And so there are whole different ways that they're viewing what's going on. And the people at Lands' End were very prideful of their brand and what they did and their service mentality. So we knew that there could be the potential of clashes between what they viewed as this big conglomerate of Sears, an old line retailer, and then what they were doing, much of which was online. And so they wondered if these two would really come together well. So we had to put together communications plans for both how it was going to sell well to Wall Street, how it was going to sell to internal communications throughout the organization. And it all had to be together. You can't tell one person something at a different time. So making sure you had the right executives, and this is putting a road show together where you literally start. So we decided intentionally to start with the employees in Dodgeville, then go to their 3 major locations, then come back into Hoffman Estates, Chicago, and talk about it. And it was a very exciting rollout, because what happened is the employees of Lands' End were applauding this deal. And our biggest concern is they were going to say, what? We want nothing to do with those guys. And instead, they were very excited about it. I can't necessarily say that that feeling may still exist, but it's certainly, we did what we were supposed to do up to that point.